Hi there, everyone.
Hey there. Hello, everyone.
Technically, it's Happy New Year from like at least this vantage point. We haven't had any conversation yet this year. Happy New Year.
Is it the new year, or as you mentioned somewhere I read, Kaitlin, the 13th month actually of 2020?
I think that's what we should do from now on. Is it's just until this whole sort of period, which might take a few more years, kind of rides all the way through. We'll just keep track of the months. There's before 2020, during 2020, the 3 years, term, and then after.
Yeah. Hello, Mr. Jason.
Jason, Michael, hey folks.
Hey, Michael, greetings.
Greetings there, Michael.
Well, we've been called worse, I guess, than the terrible three.
Yeah, so this week, so I was the one who was sort of the bottom liner for this week, and I chose not to get an outside guest. I thought that maybe it would make sense to have this be an internal nurture conversation, and that was before the Capitol was attacked. And so, yeah, yesterday I was like, who is the brave soul who wants to join me on this? And both Greg and Keon raised their hands. So we're going to try and make sense of this week, which was probably the craziest one yet, in a way.
Perfect culmination of 4 years of just pure, insane, delusional fantasy. And just the culmination of moments of fascist rhetoric that has been permeating through every halls of power across the country the last few years. It seems it's just absolutely like it's shocking, while at the same time not at all surprising, because like many of us on here, we've been talking about this for years, right? And here it is.
How was it you said it earlier, Greg? You said it was
shockingly predictable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There it is. There it is.
Yeah, and we say it's sort of incredible, but we don't know what next week's going to bring. I mean, I still don't know whether we've hit bottom yet, right? It's just
no. We just need to hold on to each other, and I have thoughts about whether we should keep on doing this show in light of some of the other changes that we're going to make at Move to Amend, and that's something that we're going to be talking about over the next couple of weeks internally. So if you have thoughts about that, feel free to let us know what you think. If we were to have it go away for a bit, it probably would just be for a bit. But I do think that we need to come together with people who share our goals of where we want to get in with the world and where we want this country to get to try and make sense of these things as they happen, so that they don't, capsize our ships, and we can sort of ride them, and also help more people to understand what's going on. Because on one hand, I didn't think that we would see in my life, especially not the way that the Capitol was, overtaken this week. But on the other hand, and I've seen a lot of people, kind of on the left being like, well, if they can do it, we can do it. And it's like, yeah, when the police open the door for you and make sure that there are only a handful of them at said door in the first place, like, yeah, you can overtake the Capitol. So I think that, and there's a huge context for why that would be true. And it has nothing to do with Trump, right? Trump has everything to do with it, but it's not because of Trump. So I think we should obviously start with that event, but there's some other stuff that we wanted to talk about too. So what do you guys want to say about what we saw go down on Wednesday?
Go ahead, Keon. Want to start?
Yeah, I mean, this idea that all of a sudden, oh, if Trump can do it, we can do it too. I get the memes and the sayings, like social media is easier to hack into than, or is harder to hack into than the U.S. Capitol, basically, sort of thing. But it's like,
there's no. Hold on, that's just bullshit. Who has anybody who's in the audience here been to a protest at the Capitol? Because Greg and I have.
I
And
have.
Keon has, right, that's right, Keon has. So what is your experience when you're at the Capitol and you're at a mass mobilization where there are thousands of people who are protesters? Did
Even
it
at
look like
peacetime.
easy to get into the Capitol? Was there any way that you would possibly even get to the stairs, let alone up them?
Right. There are people with semi-automatic weapons, like standing right in front of the Capitol, like rifles, waiting for somebody to just
On
try and storm
buildings
those
up
things.
above
Every
you,
single
ready to
corner.
come down. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like there's like if
protest at the Capitol. Go ahead,
right,
Greg.
like the
Well,
yeah,
even before 9/11, there was before and after 9/11, when there were a lot of changes made, and they put up the concrete barriers so that vehicles can't get through. Bicycles could, but no kind of vehicles, fearful, obviously, of explosives in it. But even before 9/11, I've probably been being in Ohio, it's easy enough when some horrific fill in the blank war is going on. We would organize buses, a couple hours there and back. They're good 15, 20 times. And even before 9/11, we'd go anywhere near the Capitol, and there they would be. The police and dressed in garb, intimidating, not cavorting at all with people. Maybe you would get, just sort of a non-glare if you would speak to them or try to speak to them. But obviously after 9/11, it just ramped up incredibly. And you couldn't, we were there obviously most of the time on weekends, but not always. You couldn't get anywhere close to getting inside because on days of marches and rallies, they would say, nope, you can't get in.
Oh, right, absolutely. And then there'd be a wall of police between. So this idea that, it's so easy to storm the barricades is absolute fallacy. And it really, really, really goes to show that it wasn't like some bumbling cops who just kind of didn't know what they were getting in for. I mean, first of all, we've been hearing about the fact that this action was going to happen for weeks and weeks, and certainly law enforcement knew about it. And everyone in government.
We heard about it in Sacramento. We heard Proud Boys talking about it in Sacramento.
Right. And so, one, there's that. And then two, all of the planning for how that's going to be, what's going to be put in place, what the chain of command is going to be, how many officers there are going to be, where they're going to be stationed, all that shit gets decided ahead of time. It's not like they're on the fly needing to call in the National Guard for reinforcements. I mean, it was mind-boggling. And I think it has to do with one, somebody at the top in a number of different positions helped facilitate this happening the way that it did. Yep. And two, just the absolutely embedded idea that white people on the right are not a threat, and therefore it doesn't get taken seriously. When they show up with guns, they don't even get treated like they're violent. They get treated like pals because white supremacy is embedded into police departments in every city, top to bottom, no matter big or small, certainly in Washington, D.C. And so literally the cops did not feel threatened. And so they didn't act like they were threatened, with the exception of the woman that shot somebody.
A couple of really interesting comments from people. Al Gay, hers, I lived in Maryland and worked in D.C. for 35 years. There was never anything like this in the Capitol. Worst before that was 68 civil rights riots when the city burned. I think following the assassination of Martin Luther King, they brought out the machine guns.
Yeah, like that
on the Capitol.
Right, like they just like weeks before, or just like a year before, and over the summer, they had National Guardsmen and heavily armed police clear out protesters just for a photo op at a church locally. Yeah. Like the idea that you wouldn't like use the same, even apply the same amount of force against armed insurrectionists, is it shatters whatever illusion, illusion of law and order that the party represented or that the police supposedly stand for. Like, there's no way that I can listen to somebody tell me that this wasn't an inside job where these Capitol Police were actively opening the barricades, for protesters to rush in, shaking hands with people inside the Capitol building and taking selfies with them while people were dying. 5 people died, including one of their own. And if folks remember, just a few weeks or like a few months ago out in Portland, Oregon, when a white anti-racist protester shot and killed a pro-Trump supporter in self-defense, he was literally hunted within the week by local, state, and federal law enforcement, cornered and surrounded by U.S. Marshals and summarily executed inside his car before he even pulled a gun. Like, there should, like, I'm waiting to see if there's actually going to be that level of a manhunt for the hundreds of people, hundreds, mind you, not thousands, hundreds, who stormed the Capitol and were implicated in people dying from this.
No, there's not going to be. And I, as people are saying things like, Vita talking about, yes, the White House did deny the DC mayor's request for the National Guard. But one thing that I mean, I didn't understand this about Washington, DC until I was part of an action where we got arrested. And then it was explained to us ahead of time. And then it was part of, the whole experience was seeing this firsthand, how there are dozens and dozens and dozens of different departments and police in Washington, D.C. There are more police in Washington, D.C. than any other city. So yes, the National Guard was denied, but the National Guard shouldn't have even been needed for this situation. D.C. has plenty of police. They know how to orchestrate and plan for protests that are either expected to get rowdy or that are expected to be peaceful. And normally when they are peaceful, the police are the ones who escalate. But actually in more than anywhere else in DC is actually also very well trained on how not to do that and how to let people exercise a feeling of their First Amendment rights without escalating, unlike, Portland, Seattle, wherever, where that's not necessarily something that cops are well experienced in. The Capitol Police more than anyone else. So I think it's really important that this isn't a fluke. This isn't that our Capitol isn't properly armed. This isn't that the police don't have enough resources. This isn't that Donald Trump denied the National Guard from coming out. This is that the police departments themselves have so many white supremacists within leadership and rank and file that this protest was their protest. This support for Trump, that came from the police. They have a ton of leadership in this effort of trying to undermine and suppress the voices and the votes of people of color, and that's the institution. And so now when we see what we're going to see next is everyone in Congress, including the Democratic Party and everybody who's a Democrat there, and probably progressives will get swept up into this too. One, because they're probably totally scared. I imagine it was pretty scary to be a congressperson that day, especially one who, they recognize your face and they hate you. And then two, just because that's going to be the general sort of sentiment and demand is going to be to dump more money on police, to do surveillance against protesters, which the police are going to use to surveil and crack down on the protesters or the people who are advocating for the kind of change that they don't want to see, which is not QAnon and Trump supporters.
Yeah, it's already begun in Florida. DeSantis has used what happened the other day as a pretext to call for greater funding for, to clamp down on protesters. What we've seen with white supremacists in police forces is obviously nothing new. It may not be Proud Boys or QAnon or other white extremists of today, but it was the KKK of old. And, that goes back a long way in which many police departments had a majority of KKK members within them, including police chiefs. I think, where I come from in Akron, Ohio, my dad used to talk about during the 1930s and so, when they were organizing the rubber workers, that oftentimes they were up against, not just the local police, not just National Guard, but they were fested with KKK, who were even more brutal. So,
right.
It's nothing.
The FBI. The FBI has known that white supremacist organizations have infiltrated highest levels of law enforcement for years, decades even, and we're still and they haven't done anything about it. Here in Sacramento, we have had Proud Boys and Trumpers showing up at the Capitol every weekend since the election, and the difference, the night and day difference to how police respond to them versus how they responded to us in the early days of the George Floyd uprising, shooting tear gas at people, rubber bullets aimed for the head, taking people's eyes out with those things, and cracking skulls. It's white supremacy is front and center, as Michael Adcock posted earlier. It is undeniable that it permeates every institution, especially within law enforcement. And it's funny, here in Sacramento, the day before this insurrection happened, one of our city council members, Jeff Harris of District 3, had the gall to scold one of the public commenters at the end of the meeting by denouncing anybody that would accuse the police of being biased in favor of the Proud Boys. And we have watched them for weeks. I've seen them literally have their backs to these people as they're walking around with weapons, knives, spraying pepper spray, and then letting them just go back into the crowd without any kind of repudiation or even ejection. There's no question in my mind right now that the police are absolutely absolutely infiltrated, absolutely
or rather that's the institution. That's sort of the point of the institution, which is
right.
What the abolition and the fun movement has been saying and trying to educate people and contextualize for folks who maybe have had a very different experience with police, white people in particular. And I mean, we also saw, I don't know if you guys saw this, the head of the Chicago Police Union came out talking about how, these people aren't terrorists, this was no big deal. And then it turns out I saw folks are trying to figure out whether he was actually there. He may have been there. There's pictures of somebody who looks very similar to him who was potentially at the event. So
yeah, there were members of state legislatures that were participating in this, at least 6 that we know about.
Yeah.
All Republicans.
Yeah. Right. So we can. Sorry, what was that, Greg?
Go ahead. I was just going to say there was a good article I just sent. A link maybe will appear in the chat in Business Insider about how our security, military allies believe that Trump deliberately attempted a coup and may have had, federal law enforcement officials. So it's not just, our wild-eyed, lefties over here talking about it, but how, people are really and just looking and trying to add the pieces together, saying, wait a second. There's no way. Yes, the Capitol Police, mostly it's true, oftentimes deal with just tourists and don't necessarily think there's going to be an insurrection coming their way, but they aren't neophytes either. And they can call up, help quickly if they want to and the like, that this just doesn't add up. There had to be some degree of an inside job, and to see this through their eyes. And in this article, they talk about, come on, these people aren't that stupid. We train together, whether it's French or British, whomever. We train together. We know they know what's going on and how to prep. And this just doesn't add up.
Yeah, it's kind of making them sound like they're like city hall employees or something. That's not true. Yes, there's mostly only tourists there, but also that's where the biggest rallies in our country's history have always been. So dealing with 2,000 protesters, questionable whether there were even that many, but is no big deal. That was a tiny march, I mean, there have been hundreds of thousands of people who have been at events and surrounded the Capitol, and this is, don't misrepresent history or context or any of that at all.
The level of restraint that we saw, even from the police officers that were actually trying to keep them out, the fact that they weren't out there armed with non-lethal ammunition, like rifles at the ready, like they are at racial justice protests, it speaks volumes, shatters whatever myth there was that police officers just need more training in how to de-escalate these situations. It's absurd. They know exactly how to de-escalate.
from the
Mm-hmm.
very
Right.
beginning. Yeah. Well, and so that's why I think what's so important that we're going to have to do as the response from our government comes down. First, they just went on a 2-week break. You know, like, I don't know, maybe some of them were kind of traumatized, but like, hey, what about the rest of the country? We're still in a freaking pandemic. We're in a situation where we just had an attempt to steal an election like 1,700 different ways. And yes, it wasn't successful, but there's impacts on people's psyches in terms of faith and feeling like there's you know, any semblance of leadership going on in this country. And Congress's response was to go, see ya, we're going to go home and like, you know, take some hot baths or some bullshit. And so, but as they come back and they regroup themselves, they forgive their colleagues who also were calling for insurrection and treason, and don't punish them whatsoever or hold them accountable. They are going to be unveiling some sort of accountability and whatever. And we have to make clear that giving police more resources is not the solution to this problem. Giving police more, you know, some slaps on the wrist and, you know, maybe getting rid of the person who's in charge, it's an institutional problem. And so it needs an institutional solution, like all of the problems in this country. And I would even say, you know, if we could sort of like transition a little bit over to another thing that I wanted to talk about today. I saw a lot of people, you know, like very upset about the fact that there were Confederate flags in the Capitol. And absolutely no question about being upset about the fact that we're in a country where people are waving Nazi flags, actually, and Confederate flags, like out there in the open, and that people can just do that. But seeing a Confederate flag in the Capitol, I mean, the most kind of ironic picture was the guy walking by, and right behind him is a slave owner on the wall, exalted, because he's one of our founding fathers, and people saying, you know, this is outrageous, the Confederate flag in our Capitol. And it's like, doesn't this apply to 3/4 of the people who are whose pictures are on the walls here? And yes, that was, you know, before, and this is now, blah, blah, blah. But we really need to reckon with the fact that that's why we are in the situation where we're in. This country was founded on not human rights, not justice for everyone, not taking care of the planet or each other or any concepts like that. It was that the people with the most money are more human than the rest of us. And that is all still going on 100% today. And until we deal with that, we're just going to be throwing money at absolutely the wrong place and probably exacerbating the problem.
Well, you know, something we need to remember, the timeliness of why we're in the fix we're in about, you know, the attempted coup over these rigged elections in these very small number of states has everything to do with the form of election system we have, right? Which is what, based on this thing we call the Electoral College, which is based on what? Based on the institution of slavery that was part of this compromise to make sure that those people who are in part glorified in the halls of, in the Capitol Rotunda, the Washingtons and Jeffersons, Madisons, Monroes, you know, the first 5 or 6 presidents out of 7 were from Virginia. Hey, that was the Faustian bargain made to create this country. And, you know, that's how it is. And so, you know, if it was one person, one vote, they would have had to, you know, make the case that 7 million votes were stolen somewhere instead of just this very slim number where you got the president last Sunday, right? I mean, we're not even talking about this being a huge issue, but last Sunday you had the president calling Secretary of State of Georgia, asking him to find 11,000 votes, which would have switched, you know, flipped one state. And that one state, you know, it wouldn't have changed the result. But, you know, it's a very small number of states that were in play because of this weird thing that is so fundamentally undemocratic. If we had no electoral college, we wouldn't have been in this fix from November 3rd up to the present time. And all of this would have been moot. So, you know, we've got to come back, circle back at some point and have a very hard look at the very undemocratic nature as well as the slave origins of this thing we call the Electoral College.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And we need to really recognize and understand, like, this isn't just like, this, like, there's a significant number of our elected officials at the federal level that are openly embracing fascism. Like, Baloo John Breaker says, winners cook the books. Like some do, but fascists, especially fascists, cook the books. And like, that's what this insurrection was. It was a fascist attempt to overthrow the popular will of the American people, which in and of itself doesn't actually have a direct vote on the president. It is through this electoral college, right? And there's going to be a lot of reckoning with friends, family, and members of and public officials who have allowed such fascist rhetoric to be spewed, lies to be absolutely poured out in corporate-owned news media, on the monopolistic Facebook and social media companies. All of these groups are culpable and have blood on their hands now because of what they allow to spread throughout the country. We've seen this before in so many different places, in Spain, in Russia, in Germany, Nazi Germany. Like, we know exactly what to expect. That's why this isn't, like, as you said, like, this is, as you say, shockingly predictable. Nobody is surprised by this. It's just the culmination of literally 4 years of building to this moment. And now there is a significant number of the population that is believing this. Granted, there's not a majority. I keep hearing people talk about, how we still need to be reasonable and reach out to the other half of the American population. Half the American population supports Trump. No, actually, it's less than a quarter of the population. 74 million people out of 325 million people is less than 25% of the U.S. population, and even less. And that's assuming that all 74 million of them are card-carrying Republican Party members. So.
Well, or who supported what happened here, which, I've seen anecdotally a lot of people saying, like, okay, I don't think I can do this anymore. Exactly. I hate the Democrats for for a host of different reasons, or I don't trust them. I mean, and that goes back to, our two-party system. And when people have no real choice, they sort of get funneled into one terrible option or another, which really just feed on each other and help set each other up. I mean, neoliberalism has relied, and Democrats have counted on the ability and helped feed the crazy with Trump, because it's helpful to be able to blame everything on him or Mitch McConnell and say, well, we would do X, Y, or Z, but we can't because of that. And so, we don't really need to take a stand. We don't really need to solve problems. We don't really need to advocate for real solutions, because if we did, they would stop us. And so, it'll be interesting to see what happens now that he's kind of gonna. I mean, I don't know what'll happen. I would never put any money on predicting what Trump will do or what. But I'm not sure how you have a personality type like Trump and you come back from this situation where he had to put his tail between his legs and capitulate yesterday. And obviously somebody made him do that and tell him that he needed to call it off. And we'll see what happens.
Where is it with his daughter, Ivanka? who also was one of those who praised these protesters as American patriots. Please please be peaceful. Yeah, you can call them whatever you want, but Wednesday was anything but peaceful, and it was anything but democratic. And it's and let's realize, as Darnell has pointed out, we are not a democracy. Even a constitutional republic is a stretch at this point. We are a two-party duopoly that pays service to a corporate oligarchy who is willing to embrace fascism if they can make a buck off of it. Regardless of who of who wins elections in this country, Democrats, Republicans, they don't represent a majority of the country. In fact, they represent barely half of it. If you take Joe Biden's support, voters and Trump supporters and combine them together, it comes out to almost 155 million.
The policies that they represent what, 10% of people's interests, or maybe one?
They agree on 90% of the policies. that they put forward, but like it's the certain social issues that they disagree with, and that's
Well,
supposed to
let's make
be
sure,
the
though,
battleground.
The
let's
full
try to
move.
tell people about the People's Constitution before because we're all riled, but I see comments happening where people are saying, like, well, what about a new constitution if the first one is rotten? So do either one of you want to make sure that folks know about this project that we launched?
Well, before going from that, can we just, I know we've been paying a lot of attention to, the people on the ground, the crazies who were part of the riot and the insurrection, and Trump and the, enabling sycophants in Congress who were trying to, steal the election in part for their own personal gain. But, we cannot forget the people at the very top, in part, who, in a sense, are funding this, who are at the top of even the political front people, who we might think are puppets. And those are the doning class, the owning class, the property class, those who have been funding these politicians, and in fact, who funded, in part, this whole movement. I mean, people just don't come out of nowhere and the like. And so, I just, maybe posted on the chat is a good piece David Sirota, I think, posted this morning or yesterday, about who some of these people are who are now trying to, they're like rats jumping ship, trying to save their behinds and say, oh, what happened? It's insurrection and all that, horrible. But Blackstone CEO Steven Schwartzman, he contributed or invested $40 million to GOP groups and to a Trump super PAC in 2020 election. Now all of a sudden he's pivoting and saying it's horrible. The no, not Brothers anymore, but Americans for Prosperity. Have all these groups coming out and condemning this, Chamber of Commerce and all of that. But in this article are sort of the insider game of how much money they've given to promote this conspiracy theory, Trump, all these enablers, Hawley, Cruz, and all the rest, even when they were coming out with this wild crap, that it's very important we understand. And these companies, something like, what is it, Popular Information reported that just 20 corporations spent over $16 million over the past six years backing the 138 Republican lawmakers who publicly committed to rejecting the certified electoral college votes. We cannot forget those ultimate financial enablers who may be, on the surface, rhetorically now trying to pivot, but you can bet when the glare is moved somewhere else, they will try to rebrand themselves ever so slightly and come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and keeping it in the big picture, when we're looking at these donors and like who they represent, like let's be clear, like virtually all of these elite political donors are exclusively older white men. Like outside campaign donors have 3 times more access to incumbents than their own constituents, but like the majority of them are unequivocally white. Like of the 3 million, like I'm looking for the express numbers here or whatnot, but like basically we live in a country where 3% of the population is funding 45% of congressional donations, basically, and virtually all of those are white and are male, like 68, like over 68%,
and old, really old,
and
too.
old, very old. So like let's not pretend like this corporate oligarchy that controls our political process isn't also shilling at responsible for the white supremacy that is endemic. It's like that is systemically rooted within the founding of the United States. And a lot of these arbitrary divides along race, gender, and class were created for the express purpose of segregating the population, because smaller, like large populations are easier to manage when you're pitting them against each other and fighting one another for over petty arbitrary social differences, and it makes it easier for a small wealthy minority to control the discourse and exploit those populations to their exclusive benefit, as we have seen from the days of slavery into the years of Jim Crow, into the attempted genocide of Native Americans in the land that our nation was founded on, into today. It's still ongoing, and it's a root emblematic part of American culture that we cannot at any point after today, like after Wednesday, ignore.
And after Trump leaves the White House, right? Because,
Mm-hmm.
all of that has been fomented in the interests of sort of, propping him up to help facilitate a massive additional theft of wealth on the part of those who are already very wealthy. And now they want to sort of like put it back in the box. Let's get things a little bit more respectable around here. This is really how we normally do things in the United States. We're not this crass and blatant. But you can't put that juice back in the bottle. And then also the fact that we're not going to see any kind of economic relief, any kind of meaningful leadership, any kind of reckoning of any kind coming from the new people who are going to be, in the positions of leadership in this country, means that all of that seething rage and frustration and sense that the people responsible are, low-income people, are so poor people, are people of color, are immigrants, are Black people, etc., is all still there. It's not going to go away. And whoever comes next, who is talking that rhetoric, who probably is a little bit less out of their mind than Trump, is going to be extremely dangerous, and that is inevitable. And so what we need to do between now and then is really expose the fact that these elites are the ones who are responsible, and those of us who are not elites are all being screwed, not equally, but we are all being screwed, and it's in our interests to get them out. And it doesn't matter whether there's a D or an R next to their name. The whole system is rotten. And that's part of where the People's Constitution comes in, because it's not about something that just happened in our lifetimes. It's not about something that just happened in the last 4 years, certainly. It's not about something that happened since George Bush, or since Citizens United. It goes all the way back. It's foundational. There are people who have been, explaining this and resisting this and articulating this for, ever since it started. So we can elevate and help amplify those analyses. And then the solutions that we need also don't need to be invented. We know what they are. Taking care of each other. It's taking care of the planet. It's not maximizing money above everything else. It's like pretty basic. So that's like the good news, because it's not like we need to like invent something. We just need to act like more humans, and we need to we need to have those who are in power and those who are exercising power doing it from a interest for the greater good, and or democracy, which we really have very, very, very little in this country.
Yeah, Lawrence here is spot on when he talks about MTA is about power. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reduce the power of the power elite. That's what the We the People Amendment is trying to do, to defang the power and influence of well-to-do people and corporations. But it's also, this People Toward a People's Constitution project is trying to increase our power by democratizing the Constitution, by giving us authentically and people who have historically not been seated at the table an opportunity to have their voice authentically heard.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I mean, that's the
constitution.us. A few people have shared that link. Alfonso put it rolling on the bottom there. And it's meant to be like, we're not in a position to rewrite the Constitution and make a new Constitution, obviously, because as we talked about at the beginning of the show, if we were to try to storm the Capitol in the interest of democracy and sharing power and justice, we would be gunned down. So we need to build up our power to do that in a way that is different than that. And part of that is coming together and, and making plans and sharing, organizing capacity and coming up with what we would want to say, and then how we're going to get from where we are now, which is, extremely powerless in any kind of institutional way, to where we need to get to, because it has to get done. And as somebody else mentioned, yes, the right is way more organized on how, even though the Constitution really serves, the elite's interests so much better than it serves the people's interests, because they have the lawmakers and they own the legal system and et cetera, et cetera. Nonetheless, there's ways that they still would like to adjust it, which is basically to get rid of all the amendments that people's movements have fought for and driven into it. And so they are better organized than we are. And we're not in a position to just slap some document on the table and be able to fight for it. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to figure out what to do to instill these both policies and, more fundamentally, the principles that we know that we need for a healthy, functioning society into the Constitution. That doesn't mean we don't do the fight. It just means that we be real about what we're starting with.
Right. Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that inspired me to get involved with Move to an End going on 8 years ago was the possibility of actually having a conversation of what a people-centered, sustainable constitution actually looks like. Like many of us that Move to an End have talked about how the We the People Amendment, is a critical first step towards opening the door for towards a real democracy that represents and is accountable to we the people, all people, not just white, wealthy corporate owners. But imagine if we could have new bills of rights that guarantee basic rights of labor, paid sick leave, parental leave, free, rights to education for the free and full development of the human personality, rights to privacy and the right to know, and also rights of nature that we could actually have and protect, so that future so our children, our grandchildren, and their children can actually enjoy the fruits of our labor that their ancestors actually have done for them or tried to do for them. These are the things that we could have if we got these wealthy corporate oligarchs out of the way and their corporate vehicles out of the way and subordinate and accountable to the people that created those corporate vehicles. That's what this that's the inspiration for me to for continuing with this movement, for passing the We the People Amendment, not for just getting ending corporate constitutional rights, that farce, and making clear money is not speech, but to actually have the conversation of what does real democracy of, by, and for the people look like.
Yeah. Norm Conrad talks about the need to try to come together, activist groups, and suggestions strategically trying to focus on securing, buying up radio stations to get the word out. Kind of interesting. You talk about the need to sort of think or rethink communications, because we are giving that some thought. It may be a little premature at this juncture to talk about that. I don't know. You may want to say something, maybe not at this point, Kaitlin, but the idea being to figure out how, yes, we do need to talk more about, telling the truth. I think one thing that has come out, between our friends in Congress, in which they are banting about the lies of the rigged elections versus those who need to tell the truth. Certainly, no, we don't have the power yet to overrun Congress, but we do have the power, and it is a potent power, to tell the truth, and to tell the truth from our own experience, and to try to lift up people who we work with and whose voices have not been heard, to invite them to tell their truths, and to do it in a humble way, a genuine way, but a sincere way, and a collective way. And doing that individually, of course, is important, but when you have mediums in which you can do that, it's even more important and potent. And that is certainly a stepping stone to developing then organized people power, to where we can, do proactive things, but also gum up the system too, of resisting in ways. So, it's a very important combination of truth telling and having the means to tell that truth, both individually and collectively. So you'll be hearing more of us about that.
There'll be more to say soon. But maybe just to say right now, we're in the process of, so there are two organizational entities that kind of have been part of the We the People Amendment work, and really Move to Amend is the campaign and the project to pass the We the People Amendment. Democracy Unlimited was one of our founding organizations and is kind of holding just the educational work that Move to Amend does through the Move to Amend Education Fund. And, that's largely been about receiving donations and kind of like what source they've come from, et cetera. But one of the things that we have been talking about in 2020, and as we launch the People's Constitution Project, which actually will be more a project of Democracy Unlimited, is also a media network. And having, again, that be more probably a Democracy Unlimited thing, although, when it's the same people, then, the actual organization doesn't matter as much. But because that is education work, as Greg said, and it's less about, the lobbying of Congress members and more about talking to people and helping inspire, connect the dots, and amplify organizing work that is happening, and this building for power work that is happening in so many ways and is gaining in traction, even against all odds, even last year, even amidst a pandemic and police crackdown and, greater authoritarianism and repression than we've seen in my lifetime. And so, I think, though, that we also have to make sure to do that in a way that is as powerful as possible. So, radio is has been really valuable to me at different points, but most Americans don't listen to radio that much. It's more through the internet. And on one hand, corporations have a lot of control in that realm, and so we have to figure out how to take that into account. But on the other hand, that's also where people are. So that's part of what we're looking at too, is like, what is the best platform to reach the most people, and in fact, the people who are most ready to be activated. And in my experience and my read of it, that's more young people than Move to Amend has been activating up to this point. And so that's part of where we really want to go. And I'm not that young. When I say young, I just mean we need to lower our median age maybe by 40 years.
I guess I should leave then.
Maybe it's 30.
Yeah. No rush, please, Jared. We want you here. Yeah, we do need to really make those inroads and bring in more people into this movement. And the best way to start that, of course, is from the ground up, at the local level. Move to Amend is one of the Move to Amend's issues is one of the few issues that really transcends the political partisan divide and intersects with every struggle for justice that's happening today. So, as many of us at Move to Amend, tell folks over the years, if police accountability or education as a human right or health or Medicare for all is your number one issue, make Move to Amend your number two and get involved really in those number one issues, because if we can actually get these these big corporations and their industries and their executives out of the way, we could actually stand to level the playing field across the board for every movement, every struggle for justice that's happening. And that starts at the local level, building those relationships by doing grassroots organizing, talking with your friends, neighbors, people at a protest, people at a march, or even just a festival about these issues, about Move to Amend and the We the People Amendment. It's the best way still, the most effective way to really build collective people power. And really, as important as it is to pay attention to what's happening at the federal level, you have to pay even more attention at the local level, at the state level in particular, because we need, the only way that we're going to be able to pressure Congress to take action on this is if they see a groundswell of support coming from the local and state levels with this. So talk to your elected officials at the city council, your county commissioners or board of supervisors, and your state legislatures.
No,
or replace them outright. Here in Sacramento, we're looking to replace the slate. We just had 3 new city council members, for which is more than we've had in like I think the last 20 years or so. So there's a lot of opportunity that's coming up, and like honestly, with Wednesday, there's a huge like the earth is shifting on a lot of these issues, and like now's the time to really like push hard. Like push back hard on any notion that's going to say like, you know, we need to give even more of our like our local money and general fund money to police, you know, or to the military industrial complex. We need to give more money to businesses, even though they've taken the lion's share of the COVID relief like funding. You know, we need to double down on actually providing emergency relief to the people. We've been like, because the majority of us, including many people that supporting Trump right now, have been suffering and struggling without the basic protections and like, you know, and guarantees that was supposed to come from our elected government.
Let's talk a little bit about the We the People Amendment, because I saw several comments of people asking like what's happening with that in 2021 and how, you know, where do things stand. So new Congress, every amendment proposal that didn't get passed needs to be reintroduced. This will be our 5th time introducing, you know, getting the We the People Amendment introduced. And we expect that to happen. We're shooting for 48 again, the number 48. And so the timing will be more about that than anything else. For context, last time it was introduced on February 22nd. 2 years ago. So probably we've got a little bit of time before it will be. So what we want to do though, and there's a webinar kind of campaign kickoff that we're starting on January 21st, which is the anniversary of Citizens United. It'll be after the inauguration is over. We're really planning on the Capitol getting stormed, so I don't know if things will get a little bit, what the implications of that will be in terms of like timing and focus of Congress, but we don't want to wait until the amendment is introduced to start lining up co-sponsors. So we have to go get every single person who was a co-sponsor last time who's still in Congress, that's 68 people, to recommit to sign on. And ideally, those people are all committed and signed on before the amendment even gets introduced by Jayapal. So you can be doing that work right now. If your rep was a co-sponsor in the 116th Congress, then you can contact them starting right now and ask them to commit to doing it again. And we'll be sort of launching that in a formal public way, again, on the 21st. I don't know if Alfonso, you could just grab the link where people can sign up to be part of that campaign kickoff training that we're going to do on Zoom. If you go to the calendar on our website, you can find that that link and RSVP, and then you'll get the Zoom link. And we also are going to be really aggressive about getting, so the goal for 2021 is 100 co-sponsors. We think that's totally doable when you take a look at, you know, who's in Congress and the numbers of people that we already had committed, plus people who have taken the pledge to amend, plus people who have, you know, run for office on the platform of the fact that they're trying to, you know, rein in corporate power or get money out of politics. There's well over 100 people who kind of would fit in that target category. So that's who we're going to be targeting. If your representative isn't one of those targets, though, you could still target them too. So also, if you sign up at movetoamend.org/volunteer, that's not the link, Alfonso. That's the other webinar.
That's all right. Come to that webinar.
So yeah, sign up for both of them. We have one on the 12th and one on the 21st. Maybe a little confusing too because the numbers are just switched. But the one that's kicking off the work for the We the People Amendment is a little bit later because we want to, you know, have Congress needs to kind of, well, now especially, focused on a little bit of other things. And that was the story all of last year, right? So we're not going to take that this year. We're going to go ahead. We're going to hit the ground running. Our goal is to get those 100 co-sponsors in the first quarter of the year. We can absolutely do that if everybody gets to it. And so we'll help you with our kickoff on the 21st. And then we're going to hit the ground running as Move to Amend. And these other projects that we've been talking about are absolutely going to be coming in the year ahead. But for the first quarter, we're going to focus on recruiting and reaching our goal for co-sponsors. So that's not, I mean, obviously I just said that public, but we're going to kind of like launch that more in the week after next. But those of you who are tuning in here always get a little bit of the first info. So there you have it. And then we have another organizing training that our Labor Caucus is doing on the 12th next week that maybe you could talk about, Greg.
Well, Keon's going to be part of it as well. And it's lessons from organized labor to focus on We the People Amendment, trying to make the distinction between being an advocate, being a mobilizer versus being an organizer. And they all have their place. They all have pluses and minuses, and sometimes they're all sort of done together. But the emphasis is to put your organizing hat on, so to speak, when you decide you're going to do your work on behalf of the We the People Amendment. And what that infers is to try to really think about trying to build power and bring others to become involved to the extent that makes sense. And of course, given the time restrictions. And so to organize within a 3-month window is a little bit different than a 9-month or 12-month. So, we'll try to take some of that into account, but nevertheless, to the extent that it makes sense, let's try to think from an organizing perspective or through the lens of being an organizer.
Right. And to that end too, of like looking through the organizing lens, it's really important, when you were hoping to bring people, like into this movement and like get like and help to activate them. It's important that we are showing up for them in kind. It's not enough to tell people, hey, you're doing great work, but we've got some really important work over here that you should take on. It's not like that. You need to act like we need to actually show up being willing and ready to organize in solidarity with each other, saying, like, hey, we're doing this. What can we do to help you all? Within your own important work, like it's directly connected. To that end, when we're talking about like bringing these community organizers, activist groups, and nonprofits together, really remembering to that it's not it's not about asking them to put down their work. It's like encouraging them to continue on and supporting them in their work. And making the argument that and convincing them that this strategy, this amendment can significantly help their own strategy. So to incorporate these respective issues and solutions together. Because let's be honest, we're not gonna one amendment is not going to be enough to overturn centuries of injustice and oppression that's been that we've experienced in the United States. It's going to take serious long-term relationship and trust building. And the first and foremost thing is to just show up, not show off, and to participate equally and just begin the conversation that way.
And just a note to Lawrence Abbott, who has been chatting away during our effort today, is going to be part of that webinar. So all the more reason to participate.
What else do we want to talk about before we sign off? We're at an hour, so we might be close to ready to call it a wrap for this week.
Well, just in terms of the We the People Amendment and why it's important, in part, of course, we talk a lot about money in politics. And one of the other little things that happened this week, of course, was this election that took place, 2 elections, in fact, in Georgia, which was historic, both in terms of electing African-American and Jew for the first time from the state of Georgia, and the first time an African-American has been elected in the South. Yeah. Now, again, just faces and religions don't necessarily confirm to policies. We know that. But nevertheless, it is pretty amazing. But what was also amazing was the amount of cash spent. And when you add those 2 elections together, 9 of the 10 largest, most expensive campaigns in the history of our republic were Senate campaigns in 2020. So yes, we're focusing on the We the People Amendment in the House. We also, at some point, will give some attention to figuring out to what extent we want to have it introduced or try to get it introduced in the Senate. But wow, something that we need to think about strategically on how to, frame this is that do you guys and gals who are running want to spend even more time than you've spent heretofore smiling and dialing, or maybe not smiling when you're dialing for dollars? There's got to be a better way. And hopefully what has taken place, people are going to just say enough, all the more reason to think about fundamentally sort of changing the terms of the debate and the rules governing elections and, understanding who's really driving all of this. And it's the well-to-do people and corporate entities, not only around First Amendment, political free speech, but all these other never intended court-invented constitutional rights that the We the People Amendment is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have, that's been something that we have really been struggling with. Those of us, sort of in the strategic course setting role in Move to Amend about the Senate, because the reality is that, our goal was to have it introduced in the Senate by now, and it's really been hard. And it says a lot about that institution and how, the fact that it was originally started, that the Senate wasn't elected by the people. It is the elitist branch of the very elitist U.S. government. And that still holds in a lot of ways. And, it is very hard for people to get elected to the Senate who are commoners like the rest of us, and then with every election costing more and more money, and Greg, you saying the most expensive election in the history of our republic, well then that means it's the most expensive election in the history of the world, right? Because we spend more money in this country on elections than anybody else does anywhere. So that's what we're up against, and even just breaking in with initially anybody who introduced, like when the amendment was introduced the first time in the House, we had 3 co-sponsors. That's tiny. That obviously means it's not going anywhere in that Congress. It's a symbolic action on the part of somebody who's willing to, just step forward just to say, hey, I think this would be a good idea. And we still haven't found anyone that brave in the Senate. So what do we do about that? What is that? What are the implications of that? What are the implications of that on our democracy, but also what are the implications of that for Move to Amend? So that's something that we're going to have to figure out this year. But part of what we're thinking and why we want to get our goal met for the House immediately, basically in the beginning part of the year, is to give us that momentum, which we think will help set a good stage for the Senate, and then also, any of the other work that we're doing, and both to get it out of the way, but also to go in strong after a pandemic year when nobody in Congress wanted to talk about systemic solutions and was absolutely distracted away from something like the We the People Amendment. And frankly, so much of our membership and our base was because of the election. And it's like, okay, that's done. Let's remember that this is still so important for any of the efforts that we're working on. This amendment is a key piece that we need to see forward. And so let's prioritize it for the first part of the year and then take stock of where that puts us and how we can use that. So I hope everyone will join us on the 21st. Those of you who are affiliate folks, joining the affiliate call on the 19th, which is not a public call, that's only open to our grassroots leaders. But that's part of where we'll talk more about like the plans for this year. So if you have more questions from what we said, that would be the place to come and talk to us about it. And next week, we'll be back with Making Sense as well. I don't remember, is it Jessica, I think, is at least at this point? That may be not right. She might be like, what? Right now, but but whoever it is will be here, and I don't know who will be joining them. But
can I just say something real quick? A couple of comments in the chat about people saying, "Oh, they're going to call their senators great," or some senator great. That does not hurt at all. Including friend Bonnie Henderson. So go for it. Anybody who just is inspired to reach out, not just to their rep, but to senators in general, by all means, please do.
Yeah, and do it regularly. That's another thing that we really want kind of shift the way people are thinking about that for this year. So we're going to have a monthly calling day on the 28th of the month for the 28th Amendment. We'll figure out what to do about when that's a weekend. But in January, it's not. So starting on January 28th, really, raining down on them. But also doing that regularly, and really monthly isn't even sufficient. I mean, there's no reason why you can't make this call every week. And you can add other things to the demands, things that are maybe going on, in a timely way or that are affecting you or things that you work on. But they need to hear about it. And also, when they're just getting messages, that's also going to be one of our big tasks for the year is how to escalate. Because if they're just getting a voicemail from us, then we're not really flexing our power the way that we need to feel it. And so, yes, COVID, yes, making sure that we're safe, but also making sure that they know that we are not to be ignored. And, frankly, there are a number of congressional offices that at this point that are ignoring to amend.
We're talking about having calls every 28th of every month. I don't know. What do you think about the idea of calling every, 28 hours?
That would be, we need some kind of sophisticated track.
Well, but I mean,
right?
For some people, they'd be getting early morning wake-up calls. Maybe that's
true.
what would get them to wave the white flag.
Yeah.
Call at 3 a.m. Early morning wake-up call for the We the People event.
Or on the 28th of the month, we could call every 28 seconds or 28 minutes.
Yeah, right. Like there's a number of different ways.
We gotta be creative.
Exactly.
All right. Or maybe the gimmick doesn't matter as much as just friggin' doing it.
So. Right. Build relationships with those congressional staffers. Like they are really kind of the gates to these our elected officials, and convincing them of how important this is. Building a relationship with them can go a long way to really bringing more of these elected representatives in Congress and in the House and the Senate on board with this. So really, make yourselves known with these people and just keep hounding them, because it's their job to listen to you and represent your will. So make it happen and just keep the pressure on.
Scott in the chat before we go asked, well, what about trying to do something at the city level? Absolutely.
Yep.
We have been doing that for quite a long time. We have, in fact, over 700 communities nationwide, coast to coast, that are at the local level, county level, state level, that have passed either municipal resolutions or citizen-driven ballot initiatives. So there's a spot you can go to movetomend.org/resolution. And there you will find a link to it, as well as a description of it. And I think on there is maybe a link to how to organize one. But if unsure, reach out to us, info@movetomend.org for some help, and we'd be happy to work with you. I don't know where you live, but
I live in Mendocino. So Mendocino's already in California. So they've already done a lot of good work in that department. But so the second part of what I see in this question is also, taking a position on these other national, fights as well. And that absolutely happen at the local level too.
Yeah, I mean, I said it earlier with really honing in on these local representatives at the city and county level and at the state level to really build pressure on our House reps and senators that their constituencies want them to back this. So even if you're in Mendocino, in a place that in a county that's already passed a Move to Amend resolution, there are still municipalities, cities and towns that can pass resolutions to put themselves on record. You can also get your local city council member or county commissioner to issue a statement of support for the We the People amendment and Move to Amend. It's really just
sorry to jump in, but also to be more powerful about it. I mean, Fort Bragg, I know Scott because he goes back a couple of days. Yeah. So Fort Bragg has already passed resolutions as well. But what hasn't happened is it hasn't happened for a really long time. And also using the model that folks that Greg has worked with in Ohio to pass Democracy Days. I mean, maybe it'd be worth just mentioning that for a couple of minutes so that everybody knows, it's a way to make it so that this resolution isn't just a one-off moment in time that then just sort of gets buried by whatever else comes after it. but is an ongoing check-in about how we are doing to push for it. Can you talk a little bit more about it, Greg?
Well, just basically it says we build in as an element to these citizen initiatives a provision that mandates the political jurisdiction, the city council, to sponsor either annually or biannually a public hearing that majority of them, and sometimes including the mayor, are required to be at to hear from the public on the impact of corporate rule and money in elections on their life, their community, the city, the state, the county, the world, the environment, whatever the case may be. And city council people, whoever is there, is also invited to testify. But it's a good way to keep this issue alive, either every year or every other year, so it's not just a single resolution or ballot initiative that's passed, but it's a reminder of the importance of this. And it's also a reminder about how this issue connects to what the heck is going on currently in their community. And so it's also a way to organize, to reach out, to bring other people who are working on those single issues, to invite them and to help them, to work with them sometimes to connect what their issue is to the Move to Amend We the People initiative. So it helps them stretch their mind and to see the relationship. And then it's a way, obviously, to try to pressure representatives to, okay, you speak out. And, you've got friends in other city councils. Why not convince them to do something as well? There's a lot of different ways. And it's a way, of course, to attract the media. We invite students from the local high school, at least have their history teachers or something, to give extra credit. But several times students have spoken to speak in these days, right? The impact of money in elections or corporate rule on privatization or corporatization of education is a real issue. So lots of connections, lots of ways to make this an organized issue, a powerful issue, a current event issue.
Yep. And in the wake of a fascist insurgency, I can't think of a more timely, moment to introduce such binding ordinances and creating these democracy town halls to actually have this conversation at the local and state level, if possible.
And we call them democracy days. And some cities have designated that day in their town Democracy Day in whatever community it is.
Yep.
Well, you can check in the recording as well, Scott, if you want to hear all of that. And for everybody else, let us know if you're interested in putting one of these, doing one of these. It's most powerful when it's done through a ballot initiative, because then the public is mandating that the elected representatives create the forum for them. So I think the last thing that we should just say before we sign off is thank you to everybody who contributed back in December to help us meet our fundraising goal, to raise $25,000 for the end of the year so that we could start off in a strong position. Those of you who have been with us all this time know that, we had to lay off all of our staff in 2020. We're in the process of working to bring people back on. Everyone stayed working as volunteers because that's why we do this, really, is to do it, not but the pay helps make it so that we don't have to have other jobs and we can put all of our time into Move to Amend. So thank you for your support, and thank you especially always to those of you who give monthly. A number of people signed up in December to start giving monthly into this year. So thank you for that. And if you're not a monthly donor yet, please become one. It's the most sustainable way to support Move to Amend for Move to Amend. But it's also the most sustainable and easy way for you. Most of our folks do not have a lot of extra money, and so giving a little bit every month helps it all kind of add up cumulatively and to support us in a consistent, solid way so that we know that we can, plan accordingly, that the money will be there to pay for the website and the internet and the trips to DC when we're ready to do that, and the infrastructure that we have. So if you aren't yet a monthly donor, please become one, and you can join me and Greg and Keon, who are all monthly donors ourselves.
You know what they say about this kind of work? The pay isn't great, but the work is steady.
Right?
Yeah, well, at least we got that. And to that end, we have a staff meeting in 15 minutes. So we're going to jump off. But thanks, everybody, for joining us today. happy 2021, or the 13th week or 13th month of 2020, whatever you want to call it. But we're going to be here with you going on in whatever happens next. So thanks for being with us.
Yep. Thanks, y'all. Take
Thanks,
care.
Alfonso,
Stay
for
safe.
producing as always.
Thanks, Alfonso. Be well.
Happy
Thanks,
birthday.
Alfonso.
For being a part of this. Be well.
Thanks, y'all. Much love.